metrics reign supreme and algorithms dictate our every move, it is easy to fall into the trap of chasing clicks over connection. But what if the real growth hack is hard? Listeners, welcome to the BizBlend podcast. I'm your host Sana, and today, for this episode, I'm joined by the multi-hyphenate powerhouse, Daniel Francavilla, a brand strategist, educator, non-profit founder, and a matcha-fueled creative mind who spent over 15 years building meaningful brands that do more than just perform. They resonate. Now, from launching a youth run charity at just 17 to advising startups and nonprofits through his ventures like the Good Growth Company and DanielDoes.co, my guest knows what it means to lead with purpose and still deliver results. So, if you are tired of the post and pray game, PRAY, by the way, and want to align your creative, media, and metrics around a story that sticks, stay tuned because this conversation might just change how you build your brand. So, with that, Daniel, welcome to the show, and I'm really, really honored and excited to have you here with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I love that intro, and definitely I'm captivated by the topic as well.
Definitely, same here, Daniel. And let's begin with understanding. Um, why do you believe story beats short-term performance hacks? Especially in a data-obsessed culture. Why do you believe? Because it's generally assumed that if you're building a story, you are going through the storytelling route, then it's going to take a lot of time. So why do you believe this works better?
I think really at the end of the day, people are closely connected to stories, right? They value them, they're used to them. Many of us grew up with storybooks or children's TV programs or any type of entertainment, and a lot of our learning was done through stories. So people resonate with that, and it's something that they can commit to, and they can remember it a lot better. And so I think when it comes to this world of marketing and branding and social content, people are looking to either be educated or entertained. And one of the best ways that we learn is through story. So if you're going to educate people, and of course, on the entertainment side of things, we know that story plays a very important role in all types, in all forms of entertainment.
True, that's so right. I really loved how you connected it with our childhood experiences. I mean, we were captivated, whether it's through education or entertainment, we were captivated by stories. And can you share an example, Daniel, where a brand lost sight of its story in favor of quick wins, and they had to unfortunately pay for it?
Yeah, I think that happens all the time, in today's, culture. Some of the brands that we've seen kind of, totally disappear, from the pop culture are brands like Kodak, where, they were synonymous with photography, but they didn't end up adapting to the digital, future, right? All their competitors kind of embraced digital cameras,
Yeah.
and I think, part of the challenge with that is, you do wanna stick to your values and stick to your roots, right? But we also have to evolve. And, so I saw some kinda recent, content from, companies. I believe, Polaroid was one of them, and they're a brand that actually did end up, succeeding, by using storytelling and diving deep into the people that they are featuring, the stories, the
Mm.
people that are actually behind the cameras as well, and focusing on a different audience. So I would say that would probably be one example of one where they kind of missed out and lost that opportunity. But
Mhm.
they're still out there, and of course, There's room for a lot of different brands at different levels in the market right now. Kodak has been around since the 1800s, which is incredible. But like I said, you have to stay relevant. You have to fight to stay relevant as a brand. And so they have evolved, but there was a long period of time where they, basically disappeared altogether.
Mhm. Yeah, that's really a quite you know fitting example. And then Daniel, when we talk about, right now we are all uh, thinking about, this particular content or this reel or this particular marketing message is going viral. What do you think? Pursuing virality works in a long way, or it is more towards um, taking the storytelling narrative and working towards it in tandem with the metrics as well?
Yeah, I think that's a really important balance, right? The balance between brand and performance. I think that there's no perfect ratio, right? It's kind of a myth to chase the perfect balance between brand and performance. I think it's
Mhm.
really important to look at different guidelines to see, which area in your marketing is underfunded and how can you rebalance that before the ROI starts to totally tank. So,
Mhm.
a lot of different organizations have, try to come up with percentages, right? IPA has a 60/40 rule.
Okay.
But new data says that, if you're doing less than 30% brand, that
Mhm.
could be a red flag at any growth stage. Um, there's also WARC, which is an advertising data organization. They have something
Okay.
called the PACE principle, and they said that the most effective campaigns balance at about 50/50 brand and performance. So, you know,
Mhm.
you always have to monitor that. And I think it's really important to remember that it doesn't all happen at once, right? And there's a big risk at cutting brand spend because that actually can hurt you in the long run. You might win in the very short term, but I think
Mhm.
it's so important to, focus on building brands so that you can succeed as a company in the long term and not just, in this one season or this one quarter.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I mean, we have seen multiple cases, not only from a brand perspective, but from individual perspective also. I mean, people get virality. They have kind of a short term success or that moment of fame and limelight, but then somewhere they
Yes.
disappear.
Actually, and there's some data behind that as well. I think I looked at some studies, and they were saying that about half of marketers are reporting diminishing returns for every extra performance marketing dollar they spend. So by over investing, they can actually, reduce their ROI, like lower the ROI by almost half by over investing, right? Because after a certain point, you know, just strictly spending on ads and performance marketing isn't going to get you, you know, um, that much further, right? You can't, you can't continue pumping a well if it's dry, if it's out of water, right? So once you've kind of, skimmed in those current buyers, paid clicks get costlier, and unless you're building brand, just comes becomes more expensive to reach the same people.
True. That is true. I second that. And is there any framework or any specific approach to it, Daniel, that you typically use when working with a startup or let's say a nonprofit with very limited resources?
I would say when you're working with limited resources, it's important to have very, very clear positioning. When we talk about brand, there's so many things, right? But your brand at its core needs to be very clear in how it's differentiated. That goes to apply to a charity. It applies to an individual leader as a personal
Mhm.
brand, and of course, it applies to businesses and startups. So it's really important to think about, what differentiates you in the market, and it doesn't have to be 10 different things. You know, what is the one or two things that you do differently? And then more importantly, how can you communicate that? There's so many industries that, you know, everyone everyone in the a lot of these service industries, it's hard to tell the difference between these businesses and the quality, and it's not just about their portfolio. Anyone can spin up a great looking website today, right? So I
Okay.
think that my recommendation is to really double down on clear positioning and clear brand messaging, because
Mhm.
at the forefront, that's going to help people to choose you, and someone is going to say, okay, I resonate with that. That company or that brand or that person or that organization speaks to me, and they're speaking my language. And the fear that a lot of, brands face is that they don't want to isolate people, right? They don't want to turn people away. But it's important to think about who is going to resonate most, and then they will be the people that actually become great supporters and they stick around for the long term. I think it's really important to think about not just reaching the most people, but reaching the right people.
I really love that. Not reaching the most people, but reaching the right people. And yes, I mean, they stick with you. They become your brand advocates, and I believe, I mean, it's marketing 101. Word of mouth. It it is one of the most organic, most authentic way of reaching that kind of popularity or loyalty.
Word of mouth and referrals. And I think, you know, if someone can't easily describe your business or your company or your service or your product, if they can't describe it in one sentence to a friend, or if they can't answer the question, well, what's so good about them or what makes them different, then you've lost as a brand, right? Because you've missed that opportunity to be referred, to be recommended. And, you want to make it easy for people to do that work for you. You don't want it to be hard for them to actually make a referral. I think that's really important to think about as well. And that could apply whether you're B2B, B2C, whether you're, a nonprofit organization as well. And I think we're seeing as well that a lot of early stage brands that layer in brand building, not just, running performance ads now, are seeing a big increase in their sales value and in their percentage of profit, because companies and customers stick around for a lot longer when they're really aligned, as opposed to just, signing up for a quick offer or a quick deal that they may have seen in an ad. I think that's really important as well. And you want to look at the long-term brand campaigns, because they can increase ROI significantly. And there's all kinds of data on this. But some studies have shown that, you can increase revenue return on investment by an average of 90% by um, running long-term brand campaigns.
Wow, that's a staggering one. And as you mentioned about uh the brand, now I also want to bring in a bit of branding from a personal or individual perspective. Now, many founders, especially for the early stage startups, they feel the need to become content creators overnight, which is I to some extent I agree that it definitely plays a very essential part to give a kind of identity to the brand or the company or the product or service they are building. So do you think, Daniel, that founder led storytelling is realistic, more effective, or sustainable, or is it more about the brand, not the founder?
Well, I would look at some great examples of this happening today. There's quite a few creators and influencers, and even business owners who have significantly more followers themselves on social media than their company does. And so people are really looking out for the people behind the brands, right? They
Mm.
want to connect with that. So there's a reason that a lot of brands are starting to invest in founder-led marketing. But I think the really great examples of the ones that did it kind of first and naturally, right, where the founder was the face,
Yes.
I think they're seeing a lot of success now. Even if you look at one of the biggest brands in the world, Airbnb, right?
Mhm.
I refer to them sometimes in some of my talks because their founder, he's been the founder and CEO for many years. He shares his journey, he shares his processes, he's open up about his his challenges and failures, and even his personal life, whether he's being interviewed on podcasts or whether he's sharing on his own social media. But he has 10 times more followers than the brand Airbnb does on social media, for example, right? So he's just one of many examples. And Airbnb as a company, back to what we were talking about before, they actually made a shift. I remember over the last year or two, they made a shift in their marketing spend from search. They were very focused on SEO and searchability, and they switched that focus to story led brand work. And
Okay.
so now they actually have said that about 90% of Airbnb's traffic is either direct or it's unpaid, meaning that people went to their website directly, and they didn't have to run an ad. It's because they invested in the stories and the branding and the brand awareness, right? So they're a great example of that. I would say there's a few other incredible examples of founders that are really taking advantage of the founder led marketing, and I've seen it work with with startups as well. I think that there's definitely a big opportunity there. On some of my blogs and other content, I have all kinds of stats about the impact of founder led marketing. Um, and there was a big analysis that was done by some of the biggest companies in the world. So the S&P 500, right? And the founder led, the ones that were using founder led marketing saw something like three, 3.5 times larger um, market cap. Like their entire company is worth around 3.5 times more than some of the others, than those that don't have founders at the helm. I think that's an important and compelling, stat to think about.
Definitely, definitely. And then what advice would you, I mean, that number, that the stats are enough to, more than enough to prove that, but still, I mean, what advice would you give to founders who feel like that they are themselves not interesting enough, or maybe not ready to tell their story?
Yeah, I would say that, everyone has a story. And as a founder, you already have a little bit of a unique experience or a unique lens on the world, right? Just by default, by being a founder, most of the population is not in your shoes. And so, although you might live it and you might find it, routine or boring, or maybe perhaps you're shy, it is actually something that people are actively looking for. I still think that there's a lot of founders that are really, it's underrated. Their stories are underrated, and everyone is fighting for attention. And people, like I said before, people trust people more than brands. So if you're a founder and you're hesitating to kind of put yourself out there, and you think, oh, my company or my product should speak for itself, I would look at some of the stats, and I would say that I've worked with a lot of founders from startups to scaling companies, and the founders that embrace their role as a face, they
Mm.
see stronger engagement, they see more customer loyalty, they see faster growth, um, and if it's done right, I think you can really make see the business impact there. I think that as a founder or as a leader, you want your story to be, that unfair advantage that your brand has. I talked earlier about standing out, about differentiating yourself, right? You could be a company selling bottled water or some kind of energy drink, and there could be many different energy drinks out there, many different bottled water companies. Maybe the product is almost identical, but what makes your brand unique could be your story, right? The challenges you face, the reason you started it, your inspiration and motivation. There's no competitor that can copy your story, right? They can copy some of your product, sure. Um, but I think that's important, and people do want to hear the real stuff, the highs, the lows, the lessons. People are interested in that.
That's more than compelling enough, Darren. And before we wrap up, I believe we miss out talking about your journey as well. I mean, your work spans nonprofits, consumer brands, teaching, even e-commerce, with Maker Matcha. So, how do you personally balance creativity with performance pressure in across all these hats?
That's a great question. Yeah, I think, I am always balancing different competing priorities as a founder, as an educator, as a trainer. And so I would say, you know, every week when I'm looking at my content schedule for my personal brand, for my businesses that I run, for my clients, I'm always going to focus on what is standing out, what is showing traction, right? What are these signs and signals that something is resonating? And you have to look at it not just as a single individual social media post, right? You have to look at it overall, whether it's email open rates, whether it's shares, whether it's people subscribing, whether it's traffic to your website, right? Look at that holistic view and try to understand, is the brand getting more awareness? What are some of the key signals that are showing that if we continue doing this or do more of this, it will scale up? And to answer your question about, what I do personally, I'm always experimenting, right? I have with the brand you mentioned that I launched, my matcha brand, for example, that is an amazing opportunity to experiment. It's a real testing ground for, influencer collaborations, partnering with other retailers, experimenting with e-commerce, and that business in particular I've run 100% organically. I haven't done any paid advertising, any social ads, and so or any search ads. And so that's just an example for, the testament of brand
Oh,
and taking a brand first approach, right? Is we're able to build and grow that consumer facing brand without, any paid spend at all.
that is excellent. That is excellent, Daniel. Really inspiring. Um, and also, of course, incredibly grounding. So if our listeners they would like to connect with you, Daniel. Of course, they would love to. I would love to. So if they would like to connect with you and explore more about your work and your insights and your wisdom, what would be the best way?
Absolutely. Yeah. The best way is to go to my website, danieldoes.co. On there, I have information about some of the upcoming trainings that I'm offering on social media and content strategy. I also have information about my services working one on one, where I do brand strategy, content strategy, and personal branding. And of course, I also support businesses and nonprofits. So it's all there. And you can learn more on a weekly basis by subscribing to my newsletter, which is called The Intersection, because I believe the magic happens at the intersection between all these different worlds, whether it's marketing, nonprofits, education, entrepreneurship. And so the intersection is a great place you can do that. And that's also available through danieldoes.co. And I welcome anyone to connect with me on LinkedIn as well.
Awesome. Awesome. I love that, Daniel. I'll make sure to mention all the links and details in the show notes. And listeners, that was Daniel Francavilla. He reminded us that in a world obsessed with performance and metrics and pixels, the human thread of story still leads. So whether you are a startup founder, a purpose-driven prophet, or just trying to make sense of marketing in 2025, this episode proves that strategy isn't just about numbers, it is about narrative. So, Daniel, thank you so, so much for this opportunity.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great to be on the show.
Mm, absolutely. And to all the listeners out there, go check out the good growth company, danieldoes.co, and grab some creative fuel from Maker Matcha. I'll just have all the links in the show notes for you. And until then, stay bold, stay blended, and we'll catch you next time on BizBlend. Thank you.